Hello, and welcome back to the Black Dental Reserve podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brigitte White, and today we're joined by Dr. LeRoy Horton. Dr. Horton completed his bachelor's degree in biology from Pacific Lutheran University before obtaining his Doctor of Dental Surgery from the University of Washington School of Dentistry. Having always been fascinated with dental implants, Dr. Horton pursued advanced training over the years, attaining fellowships and completing master's courses. Eventually, he earned his board certification in implantology as a diplomate of the International Congress of Oral Implantology. After practicing for 14 years, he sold his offices and decided to start a new chapter in academia and research. He is currently a senior graduate periodontics resident at Oregon Health Sciences University, where he is pursuing a periodontal certificate and a master's degree in periodontal science. Over the last third of his career, he serves our profession as a nationally recognized AGD instructor, providing lectures and workshops across the United States. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. It's so good to have you. I know with the time difference, Dr. Horton you're in Portland.
Right. Today,
right?
Portland, Oregon. Yeah, I'll be back in Tacoma, Washington later today.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a bit of a time difference. So he's up early with us, and I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
But before you got to the West, you were, the West Coast. Can you tell? I want to start with your early years. I read that you were born and raised in Greece, and that you're from a family of healthcare providers. So I want to hear about that. What was it like growing up there? What was the oral health system like?
Yes. So I'm going to give you kind of the short and ugly of it, right? I'll give you a little bit of the good, but growing up in Greece, my mom is Greek, my dad was GI stationed there, right? And you know all about the military, so you know there's bases all over the world. And so we ended up being there until I believe in like 1992 or 1993, and then we came to the States. But growing up in Greece at the time, if you're an American tourist in Europe, there's a certain amount of fanfare that you get because they love American culture. They know you bring tourist dollars. If you're growing up there and you're fluent in the language, you're a part of the culture, and you're just simply the only black kid, it's a little different. So although I love my family, I have the most amazing family from my mom's side. Me and my cousins are extremely tight. Um, I did not have a good experience living there, going to school there, being picked on, getting into fights and so forth, just being the only black kid there. So we came here. My mom, at the time, my dad was already out the picture. Me and my mom and my brother came here kind of looking for more cultural support. And initially, they didn't want to let us come because my mom wasn't a citizen. And me and my brother were citizens by virtue of, our father being an American. And so she had to fight with the embassy for almost a year just to get permission to come to the United States. And anyone that knows that immigrant experience, when you come here, my mom's English was limited, very strong accent. We lived in other people's homes that were gracious enough to kind of help us out, my mom being the quintessential never stop working immigrant parent, where she was working 2-3 jobs. And me being the older brother, me and my brother having 10 years apart, I had to kind of step up and develop a certain stoicism, so that way she could work endlessly and not have to worry about what's going on at home with the kids, because even though I was 13 years old, I had to let her know that I have it, like I got this at home with my brother. But we did live in Greece for most of my childhood. My aunt is a dentist, so that was my exposure to the oral health. Her husband, my uncle, is like one of the most famous cardiologists in Greece. He's like the Sanjay Gupta of Greece. He's always on the news. He was the personal doctor to prime ministers and so forth. So I had exposure to not necessarily the health industry from the side of, oh, this is how you run a practice, this is how the economics of the industry. It was literally seeing my aunt have a small little office that was an apartment converted into a one-chair office with the chairs here, the couch and the desk are here, no receptionist, no assistant. So as she's working on somebody, doorbell rings, she goes and opens, the person is sitting in the couch watching the previous person like 5 feet from them, finish their work. So it was that kind of, practice. And then my uncle, the quintessential, I mean, the man's a saint, right? His name is Tasso Spadideas, and my aunt is Mary Spadideas. But he's the type that would get calls at 3 o'clock in the morning, have his little black bag, and make house calls. Work in his clinic seeing patients until 10, 11 o'clock at night. But then still would always have time to provide and spend time with, me and my cousins. So what I saw from healthcare was a devotion to taking care of people. Here you have one of the most respected doctors in the whole country, and he's still making house calls at 3 a.m., to anyone that needs him. Um, and so that was my inspiration, knowing that I was going to go into healthcare. I didn't know exactly which way I was going to go. It wasn't later on until I decided on dentistry. But coming from that background, I think it did me a service because that's how I view healthcare. It's not about being a mogul and owning practices and how much money you can make. And it really is about loving what you do and loving who you serve. And I really feel strongly that you can't be good at something unless you love what you do and love who you serve. And if you start with that, the rest will come. Money will come, success will come, but that has to be a foundation, especially when you're dealing with other human beings. I always liken it to if someone is trusting me enough to bring their teenager for me to take out their wisdom teeth. That is such a huge privilege and honor. That is their child, their most precious belonging in the entire world, and they're putting them in my hands. Like if you don't really like understand the gravity of that, and once you have kids, and you told me you have children, you realize how big of a step that is to put your child in someone else's care, and you really have to honor that. And that's how I approach healthcare. In our industry, specifically dentistry, that's how I approach dentistry.
Such an interesting background and that exposure. I mean, another culture, and then socially dealing with just, growing up and dealing with some of the social changes, well, social resistance, like you said, making friends, and finding like, a balance, and then witnessing the delivery of care, whether it was that small office in the living room. I mean, I had a friend, her father was a dentist, and he had this office downstairs in the like in the lower level. We would sometimes sneak in there, and we're like, "What's that?" It smells funny.
Right.
As young children, not understanding what dentistry really was, but and then to for you to actually understand how significant healthcare is. I mean, what would you say? I mean, looking at our healthcare system, we're so advanced, but at the same time, it just being like a sickness system as opposed to a wellness system. Europe, we sometimes we fantasize Europe as this Western Europe as this developed, socialized healthcare where everybody gets the access that they need. What just kind of what's your perspective on our healthcare system?
It's very consumer based. I think our whole culture of American society is very consumer based, and once that kind of becomes ingrained in the industry, then everything becomes about how much money you can extract out of a transaction, which is sad, right? Uh, and on every level, you see it, whether it's even from the educational level, right? The schools are raising tuitions. They know that money is going to be essentially guaranteed by a federal loan. There's no one here that can't afford graduate school because you're going to get a loan for it, right? Even if you don't have the money. And so doctors are graduating with tremendous amounts of debt. I mean, we're talking, specialists are graduating with 1 million plus of debt now. GPs are graduating with, 5 to 700,000 worth of debt. And then you're thrust into this environment where you have to produce to justify your job and your salary, but you have the pressure of your student debt, your private debt, your business debt. If you open a practice, I know you told me that you open a practice, so you definitely understand the notion of, all of a sudden, before you even get to the point of providing healthcare and making clinical decisions, you're clouded by all these economic factors. And in your head, you're just like, I know it sounds cheesy, but you're just like, just wanted to help people. What's going on? That's all I did. And so I fear for the American system because when you have a consumer-based economy and a consumer-based culture, money is always going to trickle up. And that means more and more, a lot of people are either going to fall out of the ability to sustain themselves, even as doctors and providers. And then that's always going to affect patient access and patient outcomes, right? We see hospitals, I think there was in King County, one of the hospitals in Washington, what they saw was that there was almost a predatory increase in C-sections among women of colors, right? Um, and then you look at other studies that show that there's a trend when hospitals are in financial dire straits, certain procedures all of a sudden see an uptick, right? And so it bears the question, are these clinical decisions made because they are in the best interest of the patient? Or are these clinical decisions made because they're in the best interest of the financial, responsibilities of an organization or a provider or a clinic? So I worry about it, and that was one of the things that kind of soured my experience as a private owner. And I owned two very successful offices for the better part of 12 to 13 years, but it kind of it took away the luster of me feeling like I was making a true wholesome difference to my community because I was so distracted by having to run the business, having to be profitable, having to, strategize what treatments I can and should provide because these ones are not productive or not profitable for us. These ones are profitable. And when we say profitable, the layperson might think, oh, you want to pay for your yacht, right? You want to pay for your your country club membership. No, as a business owner, and as you know, I have a responsibility to my employees to be able to make payroll, to be able to pay
Make payroll.
to be able
Yes.
to pay the
Hmm.
benefits package because these are people who
Hmm.
their rent, their food they put on the table, their lifestyle, their kids needs are directly dependent on my ability to be responsible financially to make sure that that
Hmm.
payroll gets met. And me and my business partner, that was
Hmm.
our number one obligation, obviously, is to provide good care, but we were responsible to our employees. And so employees and bills always got paid before we took a dime. But it does take away from your sense of like, okay, I'm a clinician now, I'm a doctor, I want to help people, and so I do fear that the industry is going too much in kind of an ultra capitalist corporate direction. I don't know what the answer
Hmm.
is because Europe has its own problems, even with its kind of larger social component. So I don't know what the answer is, but I know we're going down a path that will probably be self-destructive as a profession. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we're in a demise. I wanted to ask you, you did talk about like running the business and I understand like, you sold your practices and you've managed to find a balance. But 80% of us are still, we're practice owners.
Right.
And then particularly for the Black community, dentistry is seen as an area for Black economic mobility. So I actually think keeping our practices is crucial, keeping the money in the community, providing access to our communities, and providing jobs for people of
Right.
color, people that look like us, all those things that go into being a business owner in this country, all those benefits. Um, but what do you know, in terms of recruiting to the profession, what would you say is most realistic? Where can you find that balance? Being able to not compromise your integrity, but also benefit from the entrepreneurial aspect of dentistry.
Right. Um, I'll give you an example. So I was the poster child for public health when I was in dental school. I was in all the outreach events. Then I started organizing all the outreach events. Everything I did, I just knew I was going to go into public health. You get out and I got job offers by like King County Community Health, the state prison. I can't remember the name of it, but then you look at it, and when you come in up poor, and someone says, all right, your starting salary would be 92,000 a year, right? When you're a dental student, you see that on the website, you're like, oh, I'm going to be rich, right? Because you have no real concept. Because to me, I thought I was balling out when I was making $13 an hour as a pharmacy tech at Walgreens, right? Um, then you get out and you realize you start doing the numbers and the math, and they really don't go over this with you in dental school. It's like, okay, I'm making X amount of money. So much of it's going to go to taxes. So much of it's going to go to my school loans. So much is going to go to my licensure, continuing education, and so forth. I'm now in my late 20s, right? So I've got to start a life. In my case, I was already married. I had kids. A lot of us first geners have extended family to support. So I knew that I was going to have to support my mother and my brother. And then you start seeing that number dwindle, right? And you're like, okay, I'm not sure I can take this community job, which I struggled with because I thought to myself, well, am I selling out if I go into private practice? So even though I started with community health jobs, it went from like 5 days a week community health to like 4 days a week and 1 day private practice and 3 and 2 and 2. And eventually I sat down and I made a contract with myself and I said, you know, God willing, I have the rest of my life, right? And we know that's not guaranteed, but if I have the rest of my life, that means I have the rest of my life to save the world. I got to start with me, my immediate circle, and eventually position myself not only to save the world, and I say that metaphorically, but to be able to offer more to the world than I can offer right now. And so I focused on private practice. I got into implants. I became a really, really, really good clinician. Okay. I had two businesses. I felt my contribution to the community was, yeah, I'm clearly not going to discriminate against someone because, of their background or what ethnicity they are. Um, so I'm a resource not only for patients, I'm a resource for employment. I'm a resource for advocacy. Then I got my clinics successful enough to where I could start taking Medicare and Medicaid patients. And for anyone that doesn't know, most providers don't avoid accepting Medicare and Medicare patients necessarily because of some discriminatory practice. They pay so low, you're almost always operating in the red on most procedures, right? But I talked to my business partner, and he's a older Jewish guy, but one of my best friends. And I said, but he grew up in Queens, New York, so we bonded over very similar visions for the world and what we want it to be. So I sat him down and I said, listen, I can't be out here and not see this particular population. It's not going to sit well with me. Can we start accepting these patients, even though on most procedures will be in the red? But I'll promise you, as my business relationship and responsibility, I will limit how many we see, and we can be a resource to the community, and we can subsidize seeing those patients with the profitability on the other end. And we were profitable enough to where we were able to keep it to maybe about 15% of our practice was Medicare and Medicaid, as far as percent of a patients and appointments. And at that kind of ratio, we were still profitable. We were still making money, but we're also a resource and a service to the community of patients, whether it's low income patients or whether it's older patients, that are retired. Both of which, where we're at, tends to skew or have a higher proportion of people of color. Um, and so, I, my message to I think a lot of the young people getting into it is you have the rest of your life to save the world. You can be creative with it, but don't pigeonhole yourself to where you currently are when in the future you might be able to have so much more to offer the world, and you can incrementally and creatively still participate in efforts towards your community and you know, your surroundings, and then devote yourself in a greater capacity later once you have taken care of yourself, your kids, your parents, your siblings, and so forth. Long-winded answer, I know, so
Yeah.
I apologize about that. But
No, but you've given so much information, such a wealth of information. Collaborative business planning with, like you said, your business partner who has a different background, grew up in a different part of the country. but had, the same passions to help the community. And I think the numbers say like a third of dentists participate with public insurance, right? And everybody thinks it's because we want to drive a Maserati, but they don't realize how much investing dentists do into the profession, the cost of education, the cost of running the business, the overhead of all the
Mm-hmm.
supplies and materials. And we could go on and on.
Yes.
But I think in terms of now that you're in academia, solidly, now that you can look back with a bird's eye view at private practice, at industry. Where do you think the ADA just had an article on Friday about that racial diversity has increased. I think it's like 1.5%. Um, I know.
Yeah.
I had to, I read the article to get get the meats and
Right.
potatoes, and definitely Tufts University is phenomenal. The the diversity efforts, the initiatives. Dr. Horton, you're a resident now in periodontics, and you worked in academia as an instructor. You're affiliated with the Academy of General Dentistry. You're teaching these courses to our lead professionals, our advocates. What do you think academic leadership needs to do to address the inequities? Because they're broadly aware of systemic inequalities, systemic racism. This has now been documented, studied. We know why the inequities exist, and we know how to address them. However, our dental curriculum, does not even require dental schools to teach cultural competence, which ends up being a huge problem for patients of all backgrounds to feel comfortable accessing dental care. What do you think the academic leadership needs to do? Is it us being more visible, having more representation in leadership? I really want to hear your honest opinion about what the academy needs to do.
Well, it's multi. That's a loaded question. So the issue is with people that are currently in academia, there's only a certain amount of spots. So to increase diversity, you're really asking them or some of them to give up spots that they would actually be in, right? And so that's always a tough sell, right? Um, to be honest with you, we just need our own institutions. We need more of them, or we need to be on the ground floor of brand new institutions, and we have to be willing to join the fight. The difficulty is we tend to gravitate towards critical mass, right? So I know you mentioned Tufts in an earlier part of the conversation. I want to say they usually have like anywhere between 30 and 50 Black students coming in each year, right? Um, I think I got those numbers right. And so when someone is looking, at the University of Washington, where I've done a lot of work, we used to put a lot of effort into recruiting, both when I was a dental student and since then. What happens is we'll get qualified applicants that get interviews. They come to the institution, they've heard great stuff about the University of Washington. They do
Mm-hmm.
the same thing I did when I interviewed. You walk through the halls to your interview, you see all the class pictures starting from you know, the early 1900s and on. And what are you doing? You're counting,
I'm looking for yeah.
right?
Where
And you're
am
like,
I?
yeah, there's one in this year. Oh, hey, 3 years later, we got another one. And even if you don't presuppose that there's malice in the low numbers, you do think to yourself, this is going to be 4 years of an extremely rigorous program, right? I've probably been the only Black kid in my high school, AP courses and honors courses. I was probably the only kid in my STEM and biology courses in college, the only Black kid. Do I really want now to take on the most challenging part of my academic career in an institution that potentially not only will I have the rigorous courses didactically, in sim lab, working on patients, am I also going to have to deal with the social issues? Feeling like I'm not belonging, feeling like I'm not welcome, whether it's by my fellow students or by faculty. That's just a lot of unknown. And I don't fault the kid for not wanting to be a pioneer. For me, University of
Right.
Washington, I had, you know, I all my family is in Tacoma, which is 30 minutes from the University of Washington. So I couldn't leave. And so for me, I just knew that that was part of my journey. There's no choice there,
Mm-hmm.
right? But for a kid that has options, that has freedom, um, and the University of Washington has made such great efforts to increase diversity. But the thing we keep running into is because there's no critical mass, the students come in, they look at it, and they're like, I'm going to go to Tufts, I'm going to go to Meharry, I'm going to go to Howard, and so forth. But it's the same thing with faculty, right? For faculty, let's say in the Northwest, do you want to go to a school where your voice, whether it's because of your ethnic background, your ideologies, your insight from how you live and who you lived around, is going to be a singular voice? That can be very isolating and it can be very depressing. It can stifle your motivation and your drive. And so it's really hard to make change when we're so scattered in the diaspora of our community across this huge country. And that's why I think you see, especially like from the Northwest here, we've been seeing this migration to the South of a lot of our Black professionals, especially in healthcare, because they want to be around their people for the first time, you know, and
Yeah.
that's a big pressure. So I don't know what the answer is other than, and I guess I can announce it now because I have the official offer, but I'm going to be starting in August of next year, right after graduation. I'm going to be director of periodontics and implants at the new dental school they're opening in Yakima, Washington, which is in Eastern
Wow.
Washington.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
My goodness. That's
And talking
amazing.
to Dean Panagakos, there's a lot of Greeks everywhere. He's Greek too, right? But he has that same vision, and he's really hoping to kind of redefine what a dental institution does, and what its purpose is. And part of his mission is to find highly qualified faculty of color to represent, the changing demographics of the country. But that I see that as a contribution because, we may not have 40 or 50 entering Black dental students, but there's going to be that one or two that they're going to be looking for every bit of support that they could have.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
my support system was Dr. Doug Jackson, who's the Dean of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity at the University of Washington now. But he was one of the deans when I was there. I think he was Dean of Community Partnerships, but he was one of the only Black faculty. And I was in his office every day. He was my
Wow.
support system. He was my lifeline. Because those 4 years are rigorous, and you need a community. And so I don't know what the answer is, other than we just keep building our own, or some of us are going to have to take up the mantle and say, all right, I'm going to live a little bit more uncomfortably so that the next generation can be that much more comfortable. And then hopefully the one after that much more comfortable,
Yeah. Well, yeah, Representative Ayanna Pressley, she said brilliantly, sometimes you're doing the work as the ancestor, right? So you
Right.
are, you're
I,
sacrificing,
I
you're
like that.
sacrificing all the economic, growth, or running businesses, and all the financial flex that America celebrates. Like you said, it's a consumer-based economy. And then, to teach the future generation, to be visible in the clinics, just
Right.
by virtue of the students who aren't underrepresented seeing you, it's impressionable. And then the patients to see you. Also, I think I went back to teach at Penn for all of those reasons. I'm from Philadelphia, so it is my community. But at the same time, I wanted those students to see a Black provider, a Black woman provider, and that's so important. I idealistically think, why can't we start a third Black dental school? What does that mean for policy? Where is that federal funding? As the demographics change and the financial disaster that is healthcare increases, something's going to have to happen, right?
Right.
And so the bottom line is that we are here. We have the ability to 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 work in hybrid manners, have businesses, employ new providers of color, and also groom the upcoming providers to be more culturally competent, to be more inclusive. Dentistry, I mean, if dentistry is still 70% white, and our country is not, then that is something that I feel like every dean, whether it's University of Washington, University of Iowa University, what have you, that should be a paramount discussion, because it does trickle on down to what goes on in the clinical rotations.
Right.
Students are coming from families. If you're so lucky to have that mentor, the dean, the actual dean as a mentor, as a safe space. A lot of our peers have their parents, their siblings concurrently enrolled. They're trading notes, they're trading information, they're inheriting confidence.
They're
And
they're
like you said,
practicing,
become
they're practicing waxing in their parents'
yes.
office.
Can
You're
you
right.
imagine? Yeah,
Spot on.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's why, I mean, thank you so much for getting on the podcast. The Black Dental Reserve is that space. It is. I want our audience to know we are your mentors.
Yeah.
Whether you know it or not, we are here for you. Reach out to us. Tell your church about us. Tell your friends' kids about us. Dentistry is a very dynamic profession. It offers every part of the quality of life that you should have available to you. There are dentists who don't work clinically. There are dentists who work internationally. You could. Dr. Horton grew up as a military child. He could tell you, about all the different bases all over the world. Dentistry allows for, the advancement of science, the advancement of so much, and it's safe from AI. We need someone to retract the tongue, keep the airway open. But seriously, Dr. Horton, this has been so helpful, and I look forward to collaborating with you, learning more about this university. When is it set to open its doors? Is it in construction? What is the status?
Yeah, so it's in construction. It's going to be a part of Pacific Northwest Health Sciences University, which already has a DO medical school, I think a occupational therapy, physical therapy, nursing, and a master's of science program. And they've been open since the early 2000s. And so they were able to get the funding and get the approval to go through the accreditation process to start a dental school. So the first entering class is going to be summer of 2025. And so me starting in 2024 is going to be, helping build the curriculum and working with the other faculty members that are coming on board to kind of develop a structure that's going to be, it's almost going to be revolutionary to the educational process. For instance, it's not going to be 4 years on campus. It's 1 year on campus in Yakima for the students. And then they're partnering with the Seymour Community Clinics, the Yakima Valley Farm Workers, and one other community health clinic. And they're building these offsite locations that have the clinic portion, a sim lab, a lecture hall, everything you'll need. And each one will have its full-time faculty members. And the actual community clinic will be running. And the students will spend the second through third year at an offsite location in community-based care.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
lectures will be remote. They'll have a simulation lab working on typodonts and all that, but they'll also be seeing patients. And so it's a new model that's really looking to produce providers who are not scared to see certain populations, to feel at home
Wow. Yeah.
with those populations. And that to be said, if you don't mind me interjecting this part here, when we talk about representation and why it matters, for my white brothers and sisters that are watching, this isn't to say that every part of the white experience has some nefarious race conscious racism, right? The example I like to use is my wife works for the health department in Tumwater, Washington. She says the makeup of the workforce is like 70% white female. Everyone on the hiring board was a white female from the Tumwater area. And so when you're having an interview, which interviews are just going to organically be the best? When the candidate is also white female from Tumwater area. Oh, your daughter
Yeah.
played on this soccer team, so did mine.
Right.
And there's this
Hmm.
organic connection, and people tend to choose candidates, whether it's for academics, whether it's for work. They tend to choose people they can see themselves being around 8 to 10 hours a day. So even if they're not consciously thinking, ooh, I don't like this person because they're black or because they're
Hmm.
Muslim or whatever, there's always just going to be a stronger connection with your kinfolk. But what happens
It's
is,
like begets like, yeah.
yeah, but what happens is for us, that means we get left out of the equation. That's why if you look at the Princeton studies and the MIT studies where, same resumes, black sounding name, white sounding name, the black sounding names got 50% less callbacks. Same thing with the more, the research out of Harvard who actually had actors with the same resumes, black and white, half of each group was with criminal history, without. Blacks without a criminal history only got jobs offered at the same rate as whites with criminal history. Now, are we going to say every employer was like, oh, he's black, so I don't want him? No, there was just a genuine comfortability, which is understandable. And although that may not be of consequence to the majority, that's of a huge consequence to us in the minority. You know,
Yes,
we
absolutely.
don't have the luxury of being average. And I
Hmm.
feel like people don't understand the weight of that statement. Anyone that's a gunner that's driven is probably going to make it. Because if I got to go on twice as many interviews and put twice as many, if I'm a gunner and that's my personality, bet I'm doing it. So you're not going to
Yeah.
stop me. But there's a lot of average people from the majority in high level positions, not because they were gunners or accomplished or driven. They were able to get there despite being average. And what we see is we cannot build a strong economic base, a strong representative base, if the only ones of us that are able to break through those doors are the ones that are just happen to be wired for an obsessive compulsive disorder to achieve what you know what I'm saying? Um, and so I want our white brothers and sisters to really understand that it's not that we're calling anyone necessarily, although there are the malicious and nefarious people out there. That's not what we're saying. But we are fighting an uphill battle of preference.
Yeah.
Simple,
Yeah.
complicated preference. People like their own, whether they realize it or not. And that's why I think, you being in your position, being visible and accessible at Penn and in your community, me going to this school, staying in the Northwest, is extremely important because the East Coast has it, right? Tufts has it. They got Howard. The South has it. My home has been the Northwest for the greater part of, 30 years. And so I've always wanted to stay as a resource here for the few of us that are here. But yeah, you're right. I don't know what the answer is as a whole. Hopefully we make progress. And I'm going to steal that line if know you said is Ayanna Presley.
Yeah.
Um, I'm gonna steal it. Sometimes we do the work as the ancestors. I love that concept. So I'll credit you
Yeah.
for gifting me with that pearl right there.
No, she's love her. The work, I mean, and honestly, she gets up and fights every day so we can do the work as providers, take care of our families. And to me, it's part of it's natural. Our community is very altruistic. We share information. We want to share the resources, and it's just about living a healthier, a longer, healthier, happier life, right? For your own well-being as a provider, to be around people that look like you, and also to feel like you have a shared goal. I feel like particularly to feel when you're the only one all the time and no one notices that there's a discrepancy, that it's unequal or inequitable, that's a problem. And I think that what we can do is continue the conversation, have the conversation with your colleagues. I listened to a podcast last week, a colleague sent me just so I could hear it. And there are other groups, racial groups, that think that dentistry is perfectly diverse because their group, is well represented, overrepresented, and there's so few dentists in the country, right? So we should know the populations we treat, and we should understand our population as providers, period. Whether you start locally in your city, go to state, and nationally, we have that responsibility because I work in Washington, D.C., it's transient. I have patients relocating, I have patients living by coastal, I have international patients. It's my responsibility to have empathy and sympathy for their backgrounds, their goals, their interests, regardless of mine, right? So
Right.
I think that being agreeable to all patients as part of it should be part of our training.
Absolutely.
So let's at least continue the conversation. So Dr. LeRoy Horton, thank you so much for making this call work. I know that you've got to get back to the clinic, and I appreciate the time, and I look forward to hearing more about this new university and all of your initiatives. I didn't leave your handle. Can you announce it for us, your social media handle, and where people can find you?
Yeah, so on Instagram, it's called Teach Me Implants. I post a lot of cases and, resident, work life, some personal stuff, but it's mostly my professional page. You can look me up just as LeRoy Horton on LinkedIn. And those are the two main ways to get a hold of me. I'm pretty good about answering back, any messages that I get. Obviously just keep them appropriate. But, you know, yeah, Teach Me Implants is probably where I'm most active on Instagram.
Okay.
There are a lot of cases. And then, if I may, I have a podcast with a good buddy of mine, Walter Aka, who's a periodontist down in Houston. And we really dive into kind of some honest, hard conversations about dentistry and procedures and all that. So you can always tune into the Tooth Be Told podcast on YouTube. You can get a hold of us through messaging that way as well.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to put all these links in the show notes, and the podcast is on Spotify, but it's also on YouTube, and there'll be clips available across social media. Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of the Black Dental Reserve podcast. We'll see you next time.